Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Actual Story of Actual Play. It is your host, as always, Jake, and today I have a very special guest joining me from Down Under. It's Nathan from
Hello.
the Best Left
Thank
Forgotten
you so much for having me.
podcast.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we could get it set up, with the billion-hour time difference, but,
Yes.
the magic
It's
of
very
the
late
internet.
for you and very early for me.
Yes, we meet in the middle. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I would like to just jump right into it, actually, and get started with my first question, which is the thing that immediately jumped out at me when I went to your website to listen to some episodes and to check you guys out, which was your episodes are a lot shorter than most actual plays. Like most actual play episodes are like an hour and a half, 2 hours. Critical Role is 4 hours, right? Like
Yes.
but you guys condense it to a much smaller period, and as well it has a very like lighthearted and fun approach to it. I just would love for you to expand a little bit about how the show came about and what inspired you to take this specific approach of short and sweet.
The game is run with me as the Dungeon Master, and I have two other players, Miriam and Jess. Previously, Miriam and I did another short-form podcast using a role-playing system called the Freeform Universal Role-Playing System. It's a podcast called Snake Eyes, which is kind of like a 1940s noir detective story. And so we did that in that run, I think, for 8 episodes or so. And we kind of stepped back from that, and about a year later it was like, well, we played D&D together. I DM'd for her, and then when I finished up, they DM'd for me. And I was like, I really think that it'd be great for us to do a D&D thing. We should do a D&D thing. And we spoke about it again, a few months later. It's like, we should do a D&D thing. We should do a D&D thing. And it kind of just kept talking, and then it was like, well, we don't want to do it just the two of us. So we brought Jess on board and we spoke about it, and we were like, okay, let's do a D&D thing. And then we kind of were looking at what was in the market already, and we were looking at what, kind of we bring and the energy that we bring. Miriam, Jess, and I have all been friends for a long time, and we came together through, performing in theatre shows and things like that. And so the thought process was that something like Critical Role is 3, 4, 5, 6 hours per episode, and, if you fall behind 1 week, all of a sudden, you've now got 10 hours to catch up on, and you've got to find 10 hours in your week or your drive or your commute to find it. And so we spoke about going, well, what if we had 1 hour episodes, short, snappy, punchy episodes, and then 10 episode seasons. So there's 10 hours of content, and then at the end of every season, we do a summary of everything that happened in the previous season, which we record after we've already recorded the next season, so you can just listen to that recap and then jump straight into the next season, rather than, potentially coming in 63 episodes of Critical Role and going, oh, wait, who's this? What's going on? What is all this political intrigue? We're trying to, make it as listenable as possible. And I think as an extension of that, keeping it high energy, keeping the pace going, keeping the comedy there helps us to keep that 1 hour really, really snappy and enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think you definitely succeed in that, because I'll say it's a little bit of a behind the scenes. When I do my research for this show, I usually watch like 3-4 episodes of someone's show, and that amounts to like 8-9 hours of content.
Yes.
So with you guys, I was able to catch up in almost the entire season in like one go.
Fantastic.
Because I could just knock it out of the park, and that it's very user friendly, definitely.
That's what we want.
Yeah. So the show's tagline, or like motto, or whatever you want to call it, discover the world through the eyes of adventurers who might be almost heroes. It's very it's very like So could you tell me about this, like, again, approach to the hero journey and approach to the like D&D, because D&D is a very like hero empowering system, right? It's a very the characters are powerful, absolute goats, So, taking this approach of like, well, they're also a little goofy guy, goofballs.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about that and your approach to it.
I think that when I kind of pitched the game as the Dungeon Master, I said that I'm going for something a bit like a kind of a kid's cartoon. I said something like DuckTales or Gravity Falls or Adventure Time. It's got this kind of fun, kooky energy, which was kind of my initial pitch, and then taking that and putting that into the official setting of the Forgotten Realms and seeing how we can twist and manipulate that kind of familiar story and familiar setting that people might know. And then, I think that both Jess and Miriam, they both rolled for stats. And then what happened is they both rolled 9 for intelligence. And so, as I'm sure, for having listened to the show, that we're very much a role-play heavy kind of game, very much about the narrative and the story. Not to say that we don't have combat, not to say that we don't have all those wonderful things, but we like to kind of engage in a narrative style of play. And so when they hear that 9 intelligence, it's like, well, what kind of characters have a below average intelligence but are still going out and trying to engage with people? And I think that, when low intelligence characters come into the world in a fun, kooky kind of environment, then shenanigans ensue. And I think that there's lots of kind of high energy shenanigans and definitely an improv kind of vibe where it's like, all right, let's just roll with this and see where it goes.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And that actually ties extremely well into my next question, which is improvisation. Improv, right, is one of the pillars of an actual play show. So how do you, as a dungeon master, ensure that the sort of spontaneity and creative freedom of the players is able to shine through while you maintain sort of a narrative storytelling, right? Because there has to be some on the rails, even if a lot of it's off the rails.
Well, it seems very calm in the final edit. But, definitely there's a lot of, a bit like a duck with my legs are trembling underwater trying to make sure it all happens. At the start of the season, I kind of put a dot point idea together of what I think the season is going to look like. And there have definitely been times in both the first and second, and we're recording the third season now, of going, oh, okay, well, I guess we won't be doing that. And we'll just be switching that and changing that.
Oh, yeah.
And being free to do that. I'm really a big fan of the work of Mike Shea, who's the Lazy Dungeon Master, where the thought process there as a planning perspective is to creating scenarios and then just letting them kind of walk into that situation and work it out. So I don't know how a lot of situations, I don't have solutions. I don't know what a character's going to say or do. I just go, okay, well, this is what the world is. This is what the town is. This is what the combat scenario is. And however they choose to engage in that, is however they choose to engage. It reminds me a lot of, emergent, video game play. I think of games like Dishonored and things like that, where you're in a situation and how you choose to go about that is completely up to them. And so,
for sure,
yeah, because it's only the 1 hour episode, I can let them do it, and then I go away and I go, okay, well, all of these things change, so let's just adapt and fit them into the pieces properly. Yeah,
which is definitely a skill that I think goes underappreciated often, is the ability to transition between scenes.
Yes, very much so.
Yes. So, quick side question here is, so in addition to your main episodes, you also have these like bonus episodes and one shots on the website. Can you just share your favorite bonus episode? Like, what's the kookiest you've been up to in the non-canon of the already non-canon show?
I mean, definitely, difficult to choose, because again, I think that the one shot, you just have complete freedom, where it's like there are no consequences. I can play any character, I can do anything. We played a small independent RPG called Boundaries, which is about working at a bookstore over a whole year, and it's a bookstore that's slowly closing over time. And it was a GM-less system. It was really, really fantastic, and we had a lot of fun because it was like, I think that we recorded an episode and then we went, oh, actually, we have a little bit of extra time. Maybe we could put that one in the bank. And then we all created our characters, and I created this very, he didn't want to work at the bookstore. He was super cool. He was flirting with all the female customers, and I called him Stanky McStankface. And I went, okay, this is what happens. But then as the story unfolded, because it was a GM-less, highly improv system, he kind of let go of that persona and decided that he was a business focus, and he ended up being a manager, and all of that just kind of fell away. And I was like, well, this is a really weird character development that just kind of happened. And I think that I like the way that the narrative flows and develops in that improv style where it's like, well, I didn't know that this was going to happen at the beginning, but then it does happen at the end.
Well, I mean, everyone definitely go listen to Stanky McStankyface, Incredible Adventure.
Yes.
Yes. So, going back to your earlier mentioning of, so the podcast has several seasons, right? You're recording season 3, you're done with season 1 and 2. Other than just, well, I say just, it's not like it's a small thing, but other than changing the story, how does the podcast evolve between seasons? What changes do you actively make in order to separate it? Because there's a reason to split it up in seasons rather than just keep going forever, right?
Absolutely. I think that, again, we're kind of going for that TV season style where each season is its own little story. So our first season is strongly but also loosely based around the starter set adventure, The Lost Mines of Phandelver. Obviously, we diverge greatly from that along the way, and a lot of interesting things happen that don't happen in the original written adventure. But it's kind of keeping, I guess, each season is an adventure, but then there's the overarching campaign-wide story of the spell plague and the way that falls in. I think that also, per season, we're kind of ramping up. The second season is much more dramatic and dark than the first season. And I think that there was, we said it was really hard as players because the story was more dark, but we wanted to keep up that kind of fun, kooky energy. And so it was we tried to really keep it. And I think that in the edit and then through the play, we've managed to really keep it down to, balancing those two things. And then when we've come in to record season 3, I said, all right, let's go back to the original season. Well, let's keep that high energy, and maybe we can do one fun season, one more dramatic season, and balance them out.
Awesome. So, speaking of what you just said about bending it, and you're saying that you follow the Phandelver, but it goes off the beaten path, so to speak.
Yes.
A lot of role-playing games, and especially D&D, has mechanics and rules and things that are written down, set in stone, etc. How do you balance adhering to the rules so that you have a system in place versus allowing for the kooky, fun diversion of the rules?
That's a good question. I think that definitely if you are, a wargamer or really heavily into rules as written, then maybe Best Left Forgotten might not be the best fit for you. I definitely think that I'm really about, keeping that narrative loose, keeping it fun. The rules are definitely there to keep a structure to the play, otherwise anything can happen. But I think that, I do all of the combat theatre of mind, because this is a podcast, so that helps the listeners, because often the players are asking the same questions that the listeners would want to know. But it also means that we can be a bit freer with distances, we can be a bit freer with the world and the situation. I feel like with the players that I have, it also encourages them to go, oh, I walk over to this thing. If I'm in a forest, I'm going to assume there's a tree, I'm going to assume there's a log. Whereas sometimes when you're on a map, they can go, well, there's no log there, so I can't do anything about that. And so it encourages a little bit more of a narrative style of play for those that can, see that in their head. But I definitely think that, in role play, I keep the rules out of it as much as possible. And I try to do that, even when I'm DMing off of actual play. If a character says something that an NPC is not going to like, I'm like, well, you don't need to roll intimidation or a persuasion, because your choice of role play, what you've actually said to the character, is the NPC is going to make them upset. So even if you roll at 26 on persuasion, the words are still there. And so I think that that's my preferred style of role play. It's going, well, we're going to do this like an improv scene, where if I say something to make you upset, doesn't matter what I roll, your character is going to be upset. If you say something to an NPC that's going to make them thrilled or happy or like you, then they're going to like you whether or not you roll high or low on persuasion.
for sure. And then that's where it comes in, the interesting sort of dilemma and choice for each dungeon master, for each game, is how much of the story are you letting the dice decide? Which can be anything. Speaking of letting things decide, so your world, you describe it yourself as a world of your own making, inexplicably your own. So how do you foster a collaborative storytelling experience where the players have agency in shaping the world around them, but it's still created by you, if that makes sense?
I like to go in strong. I think that often there's, and I think that in the official rule books we have like that, 1 to 5 is that just local play, and then 5 to 10 is that level 5 to 10 is the realm play, and then you get bigger. And for me, I go, well, let's scrap that, and we're going to bring in, curses and the gods and warlock deities and everything right at the beginning, because then the players are engaged in really high level effective play. Because obviously, at the local 1 to 5, I think that, coming into season 3, we're only getting to level 6, level 7 now. So, if we were only doing local play, then it's like, well, how many dungeons can you clear out? How many rats can you remove from the Fighters Guild's basement? That's not engaging. And so I think that it's about bringing them into the story really, really early. And as I said, taking the time, letting them do what they want to in that situation and going, okay, what have they done that has affected the goals and the visions for all of the different factions that are moving? And then allowing that to influence the story and allowing that to shift and change. So really, episode by episode and session by session, going, okay, what did they do last session and how is that going to influence what happens this session, and really letting the factions and the situations and the story change depending on their choices.
Awesome. So in a podcast like yours where it's shorter than normal, right? So each episode has to pack in a little bit more than, say, a 4 episode has the freedom to spread out. How do you create characters that, like NPCs, that are vibrant and make a lasting impression when they only have a quote unquote only, right? But when they have a shorter amount of time to make this impression on both the player and the listener?
I think that the first kind of, the most obvious or outwardly facing thing is that there is a really strong use of character voices, really high energy, strange, unusual characters. And I think that obviously this is an actual play, and so for an audience perspective, we're really trying to make those characters engaging through the use of voice and things like that. I think underneath that, all characters know what they want. They have goals, they have flaws, and then that allows the narrative to, them to be involved in the narrative. So, players are asking a question of an NPC, and that NPC has something that they want. That NPC has a personality. A strong tool that I use as well is to kind of, on the character, an NPC, I always put a dot point about, well, who in the media that we know is this going to be like? And so I can kind of link them into that character. Okay, so I go, well, this character is Dumbledore, and this character is Shrek, and this character is... And so it's like, well, kind of in the back of my mind, I go, well, how would that person from film or books or whatever react to this situation? Which gives me a basis of an understanding of that character, which allows them to be a little bit more full without all of the legwork of me writing out huge backstories and things like that.
That's really fascinating, actually. That's a very interesting way of doing it. So you're quote unquote taking a character from established fiction media, but you're like putting this vibrant splash of paint of your own world and voices and such on it to make it fit into the world that you have. That's really fascinating, actually.
Thank you.
So, a couple of videos ago, I talked to another creator who, from the Sponsored by Nobody podcast, who talks about how there are advantages and disadvantages to being an audio-only podcast, right? Because a lot of actual play is, for some people, the video aspect, right? So, as an audio-only podcast, could you talk a little bit about like what are the challenges you face? What are the like tools that you use to make up for not having video?
I think that the challenges are just making sure that everything is clear, and I think that a benefit, in my mind at least, of D&D or tabletop role-playing games is that nothing really exists anyway. So in terms of getting it into somebody's mind's eye from the player's perspective is the same from the listener's perspective. Is the player's going to go, oh, well, what does that look like? And I would describe it anyway, because I don't use battle maps. I minimize my use of visual images or supports for the players, which encourages them to ask questions. So that, if a listener is going, oh, what does that look like? The player then goes, oh, well, what does that door look like? What does that, so that they can react more. I think that, some challenges are definitely, it's just maintaining that through line, that everybody understands what's going on through that story, because obviously, we are an edited podcast, which makes sure that we can keep it to that hour. And sometimes we go off on tangents, and sometimes we're joking, and sometimes we have a PG rating. We kind of want to be a little bit more family friendly, and we do have some children who listen to the show, and so sometimes we walk into territory that may not be entirely PG. And so then when we come back, we go, oh, okay, well, what was in that scene that we might have said that we've now cut out, and we can try and fill those gaps. But I think that in my mind, I don't watch actual play. Not watch actual play. Like, I don't visually watch the video of actual play very much. I consume most of it through a podcast form, or even if it's video, I've just got it on my laptop and I've got my headphones in, walking around doing things, because often they're so long to sit down and watch a 5-hour episode of Critical Role. Can be really, really challenging. And of course I remember doing it for the final episode of Campaign 1. Like, you couldn't leave. But I think that, I consume it as an audio format. And so to me, it was just a natural step for us to do it through audio.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I especially like what you said about the players having to ask questions, right? The players having to fill in the audience's gap in the world by asking the question. I really like that, actually. That's a very good approach to it, I think. So, could you describe if, with the tools that we've talked about so far, and from your experiences creating 3 seasons of an actual play podcast, can you describe if someone's out there and they're like, man, I have a really cool world and I have players that are interested in being recorded. How do I do this, right? How do I start from zero and make something?
I mean, I think the first thing is definitely the same with any creation, whether it be here on YouTube or a podcast or film or whatever, is that, the first step is to just do it. I think that we spend so long going, oh, well, I need to make sure I get all the correct mics, or I need to make sure I get the camera, or I need to make sure that I have sponsors on board, and it's like, well, I think that perfect is the enemy of done, is that you've just got to make sure that you get it done, is the kind of first step. But then I think with actual play, and we both know there's so much actual play available, and there's obviously the big ones that we're all familiar with, but then there's so many people who are just on Twitch putting out their stream to no audience or one audience, which is an absolutely fair way to do it. If that's what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with doing it. But I think that to really push that is to really think about what is unique about it, whether that be a really engaging, high fantasy, detailed world, or it be like us, a narrative, fun, high energy play, or political intrigue, depending on what you're doing, and then kind of leaning into that. And then, as we've spoken about, just the last question is supporting the audience to enjoy it, because it's, and that is what is really challenging, I think. We talk about the Matt Mercer effect, which is just as much the Burnley Mulligan effect, which is just as much, the anybody effect, is that actual play is not the same as playing at a table.
Yes.
And I enjoy playing at a table because it's much more free than actual play often can be.
Yeah.
And so it's about trying to keep a narrative that's engaging and interesting and keeping it moving, seeing it from an audience perspective, I think is definitely something we're thinking. But, if somebody wants to record their game and record their players and put it out there, then it's absolutely fantastic. More actual players, better for everybody. Somebody will find it and somebody will enjoy it.
Absolutely. And so lastly, I would love to hear about something you mentioned a little bit earlier about, keeping you try to keep the show PG sometimes, and do a lot of explaining for the player. Would you say that your show is catered to a more newer audience of the actual play genre, or would you say that oh well, everyone, it's more of the everyone can listen approach?
I think that's a really interesting question. Not really something that I'd strongly thought about. I come from an arts background, and being familiar, the idea of saying, well, it's for everybody is not helpful for marketing the show or for putting it out to people, because yes, everybody can listen to everything, and that's great, but it's got to be tailored to some people. I think that it would be beginner friendly. I think that we didn't go into it thinking we want to create something that is really, really supportive and beginner friendly. I know that there are some shows out there that have accompaniment podcasts where they explain all the rules, or that they break every little bit to kind of explain what's going on. And so we didn't take that approach, as in you're aware. But I think that it is easier because I think that you see hundreds of episodes of many actual plays, specifically the biggest ones, or I know that even some people who've been trying to get into something like Dimension 20, they go, well, now there's so many seasons, which season do I watch first? Where do I go? Do I start with the first season? Do I start with the most recent season? And I was like, well, you can really start anywhere. And so I think the idea is to really make it approachable, and I guess that would make it tailored towards people who are new to actual play, and perhaps new to D&D, in that they can engage really easily. I can listen to a couple of hours and I can get the idea for what the feel of the game is like. And I would say that yes, there's voice acting kind of stuff that we do, yes, there's a lot of improv, yes, there's all that kind of thing, but there's only, I don't think there's too much necessarily going on that you couldn't replicate in your own game. Whereas I think some of these things, when you start to get larger and larger, it can be more complex to kind of bring it into your home game, which I think is a lot of what people do with actual play. They listen, they go, oh my god, I like that, how can I bring that into my own game? And so I would hope, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would hope that we could, we would have something there that people could bring in a little bit more easily.
Certainly, and I certainly felt, as someone who is, if not an experienced player, at least an experienced watcher of of this genre, I certainly felt like I was able to, enjoy it, and I didn't feel, talked down to in any way as someone with experience.
That's great.
So that was fantastic. All right, Nathan. Well, that actually concludes my prepared questions. Is there anything sort of you feel that we didn't get to cover that you would like to cover?
I'd love to talk a little bit more about our use of the official setting of the Forgotten Realms and kind of how that interplays. Because I think that's a really big part. At the start of every episode, I say it's the deliberately uncanon and unofficial Forgotten Realms actual play podcast.
Yes.
Which is, kind of the approach that I wanted to take when I initially planned it. I have the whole... Don't read it if you don't want spoilers. But the kind of the basis for the whole story was there's a 4th edition source book, the Neverwinter source book, which is just a fantastic book. And again, what I think that is really, really good about that source book and all kinds of other source books is that every single page is full of a little hint, a little clue about something that could happen. So it's like, this character has this going on in their backstory, and they don't tell you what to do with that or how that's going to interplay, but it's a thread or a hook that you can pick up. So I've utilized a lot of those different things, as well as I said, the first season is The Lost Mines of Fandelver and all those kinds of things, and taking those ideas and for me going, what is the most high energy, most engaging, high character, high concept thing that we can do with that, and really, really, really twisting it in a way that is funny and engaging, but also creates this kind of really weird world that is, good to engage in. And I think that that's kind of been the step, is kind of going, there's a lot of, there's a lot of lore that happens. So I do, trawling through the Forgotten Realms wiki, reading the campaign books from 5e, 4e, 3e, and going through all of those kinds of things to make sure the lore is there. And that definitely comes up more in season 2 and comes up even more in season 3. That people who are obsessed with Forgotten Realms lore, when they're out there, they'll go, oh, wait a minute, I recognize that character, or I recognize that plot hook. And so I try to put that in there as much as possible.
Very interesting when you mention it, because now I'm thinking, right now I'm going through my brain library of actual plays, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm going, oh well, that plays and that plays and Exandria and all the Dimension 20 plays, and it's like, yeah, a majority of them are like homebrew worlds. So taking the actual Forgotten Realms setting and playing through that, but with your personal twist and that vibrant paint that we talked about is actually very interesting. And it reminds me a lot of one of the dungeon masters that I have pleasure of playing as a player in. Just a lot of the same thing of adapting the Forgotten Realms setting. That's actually very interesting when you talk about that. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that the vast majority, in fact, of actual plays tend to be from scratch homebrew worlds rather than a adaptation of these already established worlds with characters and lore and all?
I think there's kind of two sections to that. Like, the first is that, from my understanding, a significant number of games are run in homebrew worlds. Most DMs are running homebrew worlds. A lot of the the DMs that we are very, very familiar with, Matt Mercer, Brendan Lee Mulligan, all of those kind of things, Murph, they've been playing for a very, very long time. I know for Matt, Exandria is something that he's been working on for a long time, and he's been building out through a long time, especially through campaign 1 and now several campaigns in that world. They really, really get into that. Pardon me. Through that's kind of what a DM likes to do. The DM becomes the DM because they like to world build and they like to develop. And I do, and this is the first time that I've used a already existing campaign setting. All my other campaigns have always been in homebrew worlds, and when I do run a non-actual play game, I run it in my own homebrew world. So I think that that's kind of the first thing, is that most DMs are running homebrew worlds, and most of them are going into those source books and taking stuff to put into their own worlds rather than using the world. And the second thing is, I think that something like the Vox Machina Prime show, something like that can't happen with somebody else's IP. And so I think that, they have their own... so, we can't be turning Best Left Forgotten into a TV show. We can't be doing anything with that.
Well,
unless Wizards of the Coast goes, you're allowed to do that.
Official WotC sponsorship is never not...
Correct. I mean, look, get in touch with us if that's something you'd like to do.
I'll send them your email,
Yes, please do. Please do. So that's something that we are limited with.
Yes.
But this is just something that we're doing on the side, and it's something that we like, and so to do it with that setting, we don't feel necessarily limited with our other options.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, Nathan, thank you so much for coming on the show and giving your perspective on this very unique style of show that you are bringing. And everyone, please make sure to go and check them out, because it is really a lot more easy to digest. It's a lot more digestible content. You can go down there and you can pick up the episodes immediately, and you can get through 3 of them in a day, if you're just doing things right. Like, it's very quick to pick up, and I'll definitely be jumping into season 2 now that I'm
Fantastic. That's
done
what we
with
want to
season
hear.
1. So for sure. And yes, of course, all of Nathan's and Best Left Forgotten's links will be in the description, and so be sure to check them out through there. And again, Nathan, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that concludes the show.